21st century colonialism, the new scramble for Africa 3.0. During the last scramble for Africa in 1884, European powers met in Berlin to discuss the rules of invading and taking over territory in Africa. There were no Africans invited to the table, and in 1947, the Scramble for Africa 2.0 began when Western nations led by the United States and its NATO allies fought Russia, and the United States took their fight to the ideological territory when African countries sought to attain independence from colonialism. Russia and China were there with ammunition and an alternative philosophy of governance, alternative to the brutal, barbaric Western colonial regimes. In the century, we have a new scramble for Africa occurring. The Scramble for Africa 3.0 is not being televised and is not directly apparent. When it began, the effects on the African continent were not evident, but now are. France never left the continent even after African independence. It has a large footprint on the continent. Franc Afrique is the term that is used to describe the effect of France on the African continent. Some facts about France in Africa. France holds the reserves of 14 African nations. France has countless military bases across African nations. France has helped create the narrative of political instability in Africa as it has participated in 16 coups in which legitimate anti-French leaders were deposed in favor of puppets that were in line with French imperial agenda. French-sponsored coups took place in the Central African Republic, Mali, Togo, Burkina Faso, Zaire, Congo, to name a few. Facts about China in Africa. In the late 1990s, in its quest for global dominance, China joined the Scramble for Africa 2.0 with the policy of economic advancement and non-interference in politics. China has invested between $10 and $200 billion in infrastructure in Africa. China has also invested $3.5 billion to upgrade the Port of East Africa, which is said to rival some of the ports that are in the Middle East. China is contributing to the construction of the East Africa Railway, which is expected to be 75 kilometers and cost $4 billion and will connect Ethiopia to Djibouti. China is also assisting in the $13 billion Kenyan Railway, which will link Mombasa to Nairobi. This is likely to increase regional trade in East Africa. See our article, The Effects of Transportation Networks on AGOA. Facts about the United States and Africa. When the United States realized that Africa was the next frontier and that it had no foothold on the continent, President Clinton introduced AGOA to signal the friendly tone from Washington after many years of the Reagan administration being friendly to the apartheid government. Relations between Washington and Africa had been cold and strained. The U.S. strategy into African occupation is security. The U.S. has decided to give military aid to Africa as part of their new strategy. Because AGOA did not take place as the Americans had anticipated, the Bush administration set up military bases in Djibouti and Botswana under AFRICOM. The Chinese occupy through promises of economic advancement and the French under the old promises of spreading democracy. African nations continue to welcome their partners because they feel that they come in peace. However, many citizens are beginning to realize that just as the first colonialists said they came in peace, their ancestors found their mines, their cattle, and their land in foreign hands. Africans are starting to realize that those who do not learn from their history are bound to make the mistakes of the past. And the continent has just entered a new phase of colonialism 3.0.